A good Saturday evening to you all. The Flute is back, which means it is going to be a good Saturday. But as I slide the beer into view, I just want to say, no, this is not the worst frat boy that you have ever come across, but it is a beer. Well, almost pulled it off the coaster. This is Brett Frambois from Lake Effect Brewing in Chicago, Illinois. 5.5%. It is a beer brewed with spices and raspberries added. Brett, as I've said before, is essentially the Brettanomyces, which is going to give it that kind of sour funk. Now, a lot of these, especially some of the more smaller craft breweries, they will put a batch number on there. You can see, visit lakeeffectbrewing.com for batch information. Unfortunately, this is so old, they have since changed that, but a simple Google search proved that batch 137 here came out, in 2014, which means we have an 11-year-old sour ale, and this sour ales do take age very well. The raspberry flavor might be muted, but let's go in and see. Ooh, very little carbonation, which kind of worries me slightly. Sniff test. Nope, we're good, I think. He says with cautious optimism. Aw. That was... Ooh. We will see. That is much flatter than I thought it would be. Hold on. It doesn't smell off, but we're going to see if it tastes off. And if so, Zach, redo the intro. So stay tuned. This is going to be a fun one. I'm really excited to talk about this one. So I will see all you guys in just a second. Greetings, mortals. How are we this Saturday? We're back. We've got our flute. There's a little bit of carbonation. Not as little as I initially feared. Let's actually speak the proper English here, Zach. All right. Smell test. Like I said, it didn't smell bad. It just smells like dry. No raspberry that's detected, although, again, as we saw yesterday, that may change as it warms up. But let's go in, let's give it a test, and let's see if I'm rerunning the intro. No, we are not rerunning the intro. That is not spoiled by any sense of the imagination. Ooh! However, I just got a little raspberry at the end. Like that good raspberry candy sweetness. We do have the sour, which... I just flicked that in case everybody saw that, which comes from the Brettanomyces. Please don't ask me to spell it because I can't, so everybody just calls it Brett. But yeah, there's a little bit of like, here, hold on, let's warm it up a minute. That's enough. A little bit of candy sweetness, like a Jolly Rancher almost, which perfectly fine for something like this. And a little more of that wild. And they classify this more as the wild ale, which we've talked about before. And essentially they use wild yeast and wild bacteria to give it that tart, sour nature, which I love. But honestly, if you ever do try a sour beer, I do have to give you warning. The first time, more than likely, you will not like it. Beer itself is an acquired taste, and this style here is additionally an acquired taste. Yeah, that's actually really good. Yeah. Not as sour, but we've got some good little raspberry sweetness. So, let's get into it. I talked yesterday and I said it's, one of the more unusual kaiju movies, but not because of the plot. This movie, probably never heard of it. Not many people have. I can't even remember how I came across it, but I did. And I will put a link to... There's a couple really good stories about this whole thing that we're going to talk about briefly tonight. I will link to a story down there. This movie is called Pulgasari. Came out in 1985. It is a North Korean movie. I think, was one of the only North Korean movie releases that ever came to the United States. And again, it came around, I think I have it written down there. But it was a co-production between North Korea, Japan, and China. Supposedly, there's no guarantee, and I have not seen the original one. This came from, right there, there's that movie poster. It's a remake of Pulgasari with a B instead of a P, which was a 1962 film, South Korean film, also depicted the creature, the kaiju monster, Pulgasari, which is a creature from Korean folklore. And if I remember the movie correctly, essentially, Pulgasari is essentially called the Eater of Iron and Steel, something like that. We'll do a brief synopsis of the movie because, again, almost kind of your standard kaiju movie. Set in feudal Korea toward the end of the Goryeo dynasty, and because it's a kaiju movie, it came out in the 80s, very, very, very heavily influenced by the Godzilla movies that had come back, I should say, from the Heisei period. Essentially, the plot goes like this. A farmer's uprising in medieval Korea. The daughter of the town blacksmith, after her father is taken and dealt with, in that way. Before he left and passed, he gave her a little doll of the creature made of rice, and he kept referring to it as Pulgasari, which, as I said before, essentially means the eater of iron and steel. So as she's sewing one day, she pricks her finger and a drop of blood falls upon the toy and brings Pulgasari to life. And now, essentially, Pulgasari himself forms a bond with the little girl, and now he fights alongside the farmers, attacks the palace, smashes the emperor's palace, but the appetite grows, and as his appetite grows, so does the creature itself. So he starts off, small figure, ends up kaiju size, so building sized. So he's now eating constantly, and because he is the eater of iron and steel, in an agrarian society, what would be the iron and steel? That's right, all of the farmers' tools. So basically, that is, the curse of Pulgasari, because he is now feasting upon that which he initially set out to protect. So it comes to the point where the little girl decides that she will sacrifice herself to the creature to sate his hunger, and hides inside a bell. And as he eats the bell, he realizes that he has just ingested the little girl. He explodes and dies. That's essentially the end of the movie. And that is, brief overview of the plot of Pulgasari. And I did say, if you do look hard enough, yes, you can find it. I have seen it. It is, if you didn't know the backstory, you would be like, oh, that's really the novelty of seeing a North Korean movie pretty much anywhere outside of North Korea, specifically, maybe Southeast Asia in general. But now to the backstory. Hold on, I'm going to take a sip of this before we get to the backstory, because it's going to require something. Now again, remember the time and remember the country. This is 1985. This is North Korea. Bear with me, folks. Yeah, we're getting a lot more sweetness now. And it gets that little thing, like when you have something really tart and you get that little, right here, the back of the jaw. That's what I'm getting. That means, especially with a sour beer, kids, if you ever are questioned by a man in a quote-unquote fedora asking you about sour beers, just remember what old Zach said. That feeling, that's a good thing for sour beers. So, we go back to January of 1978. January 14th, more to the point. A very high-profile South Korean actress by the name, and I apologize for mispronouncing it, of Choi Yoon-hee. She was a very famous actress in Korea, and for a while, she was not at this time, they would later remarry, but was married to a very prominent South Korean film director. She was in Hong Kong and was kidnapped by agents of North Korea and whisked away to North Korea. Her ex-husband Again, remarried later. But at the time, her ex-husband was the director Shin Sang-ok, or Ok. I'm sorry, OK. I think it would be Ok. I'm not 100% sure. Again, very, very prominent South Korean film director, was looking for her. Spent 6 months looking for her. And then he himself was kidnapped in Hong Kong on July the 19th of 1978. Both were taken to North Korea. However, North Korea, naturally, denied the fact that Choi was even there, Choi Yun-hee. And essentially, they had put her up in, apparently, rather lavish, so who knows for what that was in the 80s, lavish accommodations. They bring in her husband, Shin, ex-husband, but again, we'll get to that in a minute. And they bring him in with the sole purpose of making propaganda films for the North Korean government. Also was given some direct orders by the executive producer of the movie. That guy look familiar? Yeah, he should. That's Kim Jong-il, the dictator of North Korea, and also the executive producer. If you watch the movie, you will see his name in the credits, which I think is just really, really weird and definitely adds to it. So he was brought in. He had several unsuccessful escape attempts from South Korea, starting in 1978, and eventually was led to him being thrown in jail. Then they released him March the 7th, 1983, at which point he was reunited with Choi at a party. Guess who hosted the party? That's right, the executive producer Kim Jong-il. But again, they never even made mention, although he kind of knew, I think most everybody kind of knew, that she was there, but they never admitted it up until that point. So, here we are. Now, they went on record. There were, I think, a few interviews of them going on record as they were touring for doing the filming of various things. I'll get to that in a second. They had said that, no, we were in North Korea voluntarily. Guys, you know that's not how it worked, because you know who controlled the media, and you know you couldn't say to any foreign media, oh yeah, they kidnapped us. Yeah, that would essentially, let's put it honestly, that would go over like a fart in church. So, they said all that. And between 1983 and 1985, Shin directed 7 different movies for the North Korean government. Sip time. I'm going to let that one hang there for a few minutes. Yeah, that's good. What was the alcohol in this? 5.5, so that's why it's going down extra smooth. Plus, I really like the flavor. Like that raspberry. And again, because raspberries, by their own nature, can lend themselves to being slightly tart. And if you ever make a sour ale, which, me and my friends did when we worked at the beer store, we made a pomegranate sour ale that was just chef's kiss. But God, it was expensive to make because the yeast and plus the pomegranate extract wasn't cheap. That aside, certain fruits do lend themselves to sour beers more than others just because of their natural tartness. Raspberries work very well. Pomegranate works very well. And strawberries, because people forget, no, strawberries actually can be quite tart, especially if they're a little more underripe, or like the green strawberries. We're going to finish off the flute. We're going to refill it, and we're going to continue on. Because, like I say, and if anybody has seen this movie, number one, let me know. And number two, if at some point in the future you do see this movie, just let me know. Just be like, hey, Zach, I saw that movie. And I'll probably have forgotten completely about this and be like, what in the world are you talking about? As is the way. Cheers. Oh, that is nice. Refilling flute. Just love the fact that I get to say refilling flute, and I actually mean it. Yeah, that's nice. I think I actually got this when I was out in Chicago years ago. It was just that's just very nice. All right, so where was I? Ah, yes. So from 1983 to 1985, Shin directs 7 movies. Many of them, I think, 4, maybe 4 of the 7. Pulgasari was not one of them, however. Also starred his wife, Choi Yun-hee. She was in several of the North Korean movies. But between those 3 years, and weirdly, they only came out in 2, so he was cranking them out pretty good. There was, and I have never seen any of these other movies, An Emissary of No Return, Love, Love, My Love, Runaway. All 3 of them came out in 1984. And then Breakwater, Salt, The Tale of Shim Chong, and Pulgasari, the final one of the 7, all came out in 1985. Though weirdly, from what I read, the movie Salt was never actually released. I don't know what happened to it, if it even exists anymore, but there was no any sort of, even in North Korea, theatrical release of the movie Salt. But Pulgasari was the final of the 7. So now, let's move to March the 12th, 1986. So not long after the release of Pulgasari, they're on the film tour. They're in Vienna, Austria. So, somehow, Shin and Choi convinced the North Korean guards that were with them, for whatever reason, to leave the room. And then they escaped. They ran through traffic, obviously in pursuit, got in a car, drove for a while, ended up with more traffic, got out and ran and fled to the U.S. Embassy in Vienna, at which point they applied for asylum and were granted it. They lived in the U.S., I think actually for a couple of years in Ruston, Virginia. For nearly a decade, they lived in the United States before returning to South Korea, which is where both of them lived out the remainder of their days. Shin passed in the year 2006. His wife, Choi, much later after that, 2018, is when she died. Are you with me? So right now, the backstory, far superior to the movie. Yeah, you've got a giant monster that came out of a rice figure, but the director was kidnapped by the North Korean government to make, and I think they say the quote-unquote hidden agenda, or the feel of Pulgasari essentially was very anti-Western, which North Korea was and still is. And it was, essentially, Pulgasari was coming to destroy bloated capitalism and this and that. But, just very much akin to your regular, Japanese monster movies, just essentially with a different plot and a different skin on it. Drink time. Oh, this is good. This is a really good one. I'm really happy with this one. When I see the sour ales come up, I always think are they going to be okay? Because I have dealt with in the past some sour ales that went very south very quickly. And they are, if it would have been, you wouldn't have seen me, but I would have legitimate backup from the stank that would have been coming out of the bottle. But we did not get that here. Instead, we get raspberries and sour. And I'm happy about that. I really am. Now, while he was in the United States, working under the name Simon Sheen, Shin worked on essentially an American remake of Pulgasari. It was called Galgameth. I've never seen Galgameth. I kind of want to see Galgameth. It came out in 1996, but essentially was a massive, massive financial and commercial flop. But, what can you do? The fact of the matter is, he was out, and again, I haven't seen the original Pulgasari from 1962, nor have I seen his American remake from 96, Galgameth. I think that might have to get put on the agenda for even later this evening, see if I can track one of them down. Pulgasari probably might be on YouTube somewhere. I may have to check. But now, and obviously, the movie was what it was when it came out. Critics had their, critics had their thoughts about it, as critics are wont to do. That is their job. And basically, they kind of buried it. They said it was Shin's worst movie, this and that. Okay, maybe it was his worst movie, but guys, we have to take some things into account, like, the fact that he was kidnapped by, a dictatorial regime and forced to make them as propaganda films. But, who knows? But as time has gone on, and this is much the same way as they do with other movies that essentially will achieve cult status. Cult status being they weren't very popular or financially successful or viable upon their release due to many factors. Probably most of the time just be like maybe too ahead of their time. Or in this case, where it was made and how it was made. But now, essentially, Pulgasari has reached cult status. And modern sources have said it is the most widely seen North Korean movie worldwide. And again, because it actually garnered not only an American, not only like they released it in Japan, where I think it was immediately banned. They released it in South Korea. They released it in China. And then eventually, a decade and a half later, it came to the United States and the Western world. Probably his best known film, simply because of the backstory behind it. And everybody was interested in what was going on. Why were they taken? Did they And some people for the longest time were debating because of these interviews when they were still under North Korean control. All these interviews saying, no, the world got it wrong, we were there voluntarily. Well, if that's the case, why would they risk their lives in 1986 to run to the American embassy in Vienna? But again, time goes on and retrospectives happen, and it is what it is. What a crazy story. And because, and I think I discovered Pulgasari because I went on a kick a while back, pardon me, and I've continued to do so, of trying to see a movie from every country on Earth. And I have seen quite a lot, and many like defunct countries. I've seen East German films, West German films, Czechoslovakian films. Obviously, Czechoslovakia is not a thing. You've seen Yugoslavian films, Soviet Union things, this and that. And I came across, and then I thought to myself, like, North Korea, they may have had a film industry, but most likely not. And even to this day, everything is very, very tightly controlled. And then I came across Pulgasari, and I thought to myself, that's really interesting. And if you look on it, it's like a lot of reviews of it. It's like, okay, so this movie has been seen by a lot of people, and I wanted to become one of them. So I became one of them. I cannot remember where I saw it. I think I found it online I know for a fact I found it online somewhere, but it was so long ago, I legitimately could not tell you where it is. But if anybody, like I say, if anybody sees it, let me know where you found it, because I would like to see it again. And through that, I was able to cross North Korea off the list. And it's just, again, the plot is what it is. It's just your standard monster movie. The monster rises up to help the downtrodden and go after the bloated government at the end of the Goryeo dynasty. And then when you read about it, it's like, oh, they kidnapped the director's wife, who was, and again, these weren't just normal, random people off the streets of Seoul, let's say. These were high profile, very high profile people in the South Korean film industry, and as such, known very well throughout, especially at that point, Asia and Europe. So it's not like these guys were nobodies. These were big names that were snatched, basically. Man, I love stories like it, because it's so weird. And again, and I think this is ironic, because I've often said truth is stranger than fiction, and good luck Hollywood coming up with this one. Could you have come up with something like this? And now it actually kind of makes me wonder, like, is it possible to see, of the seven, I've seen Pulgasari, and salt apparently just doesn't exist anywhere outside of North Korea. But I would be kind of curious to see not only some of the other ones that he made for the North Korean government, but actually some of his older stuff that he made, and with his wife, Choi, just to see what they were like one day. I love it. I love weird stuff. I love weird history. And this is the stuff I would talk about in a bar. I'm glad you guys were here for it because I had a lot of fun. And again, very brief overview because to do it justice, I mean, to literally, to go deep, to break down the minutia of it, and again, link to something that I will have found will be down below if you want to read more on it, would take hours, like several hours, not just of talking, but of putting together a film and all that. So I just want to give you a cursory overview. And this is, because this is what happens. You meet somebody at the bar, they're spouting off nonsense. That's what Zach does. But this is what happens. Somebody's going to talk to you about something. You're going to overhear part of the conversation, maybe sit in on the conversation, be like, oh, that's really interesting. I'm going to remember it, and I'm going to do a little more research on it because I am curious. One, about whether or not this guy was actually speaking facts. And two, to get into, a little more into the weeds with it. And that's why I love doing this. Just a little cursory glance into the madness that is my mind. Stay a while. It can be cozy up there. It's weird, though, because there's giant monsters up there. But that, pardon me, that is going to do it for this week's pair of BS and a beer. Knock on wood. We've been getting really lucky with the beers. Maybe I'm not bad at aging stuff. Or maybe I've just been lucking out time and time again. But I know I'm pointing, as I point off camera, down that way, that is the stairs to where, goes down to the basement, or my quote-unquote beer cellar, which is actually the sub-basement, which is where I just stacked it all just to keep it out of the way. Can't keep it in the garage. In this part of the country, can't keep it in the garage because come this time of year, yep, I have had that when I've forgotten that there was some beer in the garage, and I have gone out to bottle caps everywhere and just beer foam or beer slush at that point. But that is going to do it. Let me know what you thought down below. And I keep saying to myself, I have to finish it with one thing, and I'm going to finish it before we hit the cheers. But this is American, so cheers, my friends. Hopefully, if you're having one along with me, you've enjoyed this. And remember, kids, if you like the video, like the video. Finally, I got it in there, and I feel good about it. So I'm going to have one more sip, and I'm going to leave you with as if none of this has been weird enough. But I'm going to leave you with a weird parting thought. Bear with me a moment. Now I'm trying to think of what would go good with that. I don't know. I'll find something delicious to eat with the rest of that because that is a very nice beer and I'm very happy with it. I leave you with this final parting thought. When you give somebody food, you're feeding them, right? So if you give somebody water, why aren't you watering them? Have a good night, everybody.